So I want to talk today about making good decisions, because God gave us all free will, and we're not robots, and so we get to make decisions. And I want to talk about how to make those decisions, because at some point in your life you're going to have to make them. And the story I want to tell that will illustrate this comes out of Numbers chapter 22. And well, to tell you what it reminds me of, some of you may be old enough to remember, there used to be an old show on TV about a man with a talking horse. Yeah, Mr. Ed, right? And the horse always had more clues about what was going on than the guy did. Well, that's kind of what happens in this story today. I wonder if it was inspired by this story in chapter 22 of Numbers. It's the story of Balaam. He's our protagonist. And I've got the text up there on the screen, but I'm going to tell the story, so you got the text up there to see what really happened. But what the setting for this is, God has taken the people of Israel, and he's brought them out of Egypt, and they were in slavery in Egypt, and he's taken them out of Egypt, and he takes them into the desert, through the Red Sea, and he gets them ready, and he goes to take them into the Promised Land, and they refuse to go. That was a bad decision, okay? And the result is they spend 40 years in the wilderness. That generation dies off, and another generation is raised up. And during that time, they eat manna, and they're taken care of by God. But it's now time to go into the Promised Land, and this generation decides they'll go, which is a good decision. So even before the story starts, we've got some bad and good decisions. And so God is leading them to the Promised Land. They started out in the Sinai Desert. They have to go to Israel. And the route that God takes them through some lands that have a population in them, people in them. And one of the lands they go through is Moab. And Moab is populated, and it has a king. The king's name is Balak. And Balak does not much care for visitors coming through his land. In fact, his usual policy is to attack them and either kill them or drive them out. And so he wants to do this with the people of Israel, but he notices that there's a lot more of them than he has. They're a lot stronger than his army, and he realizes that they will defeat him. And so he's going, what do I do? Because he's all worried about it, because these lands in the Middle East, and they tend to be a little on the arid side. There isn't that much grass. There isn't that much water in the watering holes. And he just doesn't want to share. And so he's trying to figure out what to do to get rid of these people. And it dawns on him that maybe what he could do is get this guy who, there's a guy named Balaam, and when Balaam blesses people, they're blessed, and when he curses people, they're cursed. And he goes, maybe I'll get this guy to come curse them, and then when they're weak, I can attack them and drive them out or kill them. And so he signs up his emissary, hands him the fee that would be for divination, and he sends him off to Balaam. Now, who is this Balaam guy? Well, did you know that no matter where you are and how, pretty much anywhere in the world, God has a way of getting through to somebody. There's somebody that knows God there. Balaam is actually a man of God. And he's a man who God has given the power, the gift of miracles to. And he does miracles. And I want to try to get my hands around this, because this is an ancient time, and I'm trying to figure out what that would be like today. The thing I think of, and I don't know if this is fair or accurate, but the thing I think of is a faith healer. He does miracles for people. And so this Balaam is a guy that's making his living from the gift of miracles that God has given him. And so Balak, the king, sends this emissary to Balaam, and the guy knocks on his door and says, hey, Balaam, I come from King Balak, and I've got some work for you. Balak needs you to go and curse these people that are coming through the land so he can defeat them. And Balaam says, well, I can only do what God gives me the power to do. So I tell you what, why don't you stay tonight, and then tomorrow morning I'll give you an answer. I'll talk to God tonight. And that night, he goes and he talks to God, and God says, you are not going to go and curse these people because I'm blessing them. And so Balaam goes, oh, okay. And then in the morning he tells Balak's emissary that I can't go. I can't curse a people that God is blessing. And so I just want to stop here, because I want to talk about the elements of a good decision. Balaam made a good decision here. Right? He made a good decision. And decision making has two phases. If you can thank you. There's an intentions phase where you set your intentions and you get your intentions in the right direction. And then there's an integrity phase where you follow through with it. And both of these phases are really important. When we talk about decision making, we tend to focus on the first phase, the intention phase, where you sort of figure out what the best thing to do is. And there's lots of techniques you can use. You can write down the pros and the cons, and there's folks that'll teach you those techniques. Those are important. And the more important a decision is, the more important it is to take your time and make sure you figure out what the right thing to do is before you do it. And in fact, it is important not to decide too soon. And we see that Balaam didn't do that. He didn't just see that guy show up with some work and say, yeah, I'll go do that. He stopped, he thought, spent some time, and he figured out what the right thing to do was. And the right thing to do was not to go curse someone that God is blessing. And so, but I want to talk about this for a minute, just to get you to think about it, because one of the things that happens sometimes is we spend our time, we figure out what the right thing to do is, and then we don't decide. Right? You have to, when you know what the right thing to do is, you should take long enough to find that out, but when you know when the right thing to do is, you have to decide. And Balaam decided. He said, no, I'm not going to go. And then comes the integrity phase where he has to go, oh, I have to give up on the fee. You know, I'd like that lucrative fee, but I'm not going to take it. And he takes, and so he has the integrity. He tells Balak's emissary, sorry, I can't do this. And that's the end of it. And for our decisions, we have to do the same thing. We have to figure out what's right, and then we have to have the integrity phase where we decide to go through with it. And I think, and we're going to see in this story, that when we pay a lot of attention to the intention side, to figuring out what to do and deciding and getting our heart in the right place. And by the way, if you think, well, whatever the Lord wants, that's the right thing to do, you're on the right track for the intentions phase. But you still have to figure out what's right to do in some situations, because God didn't make that automatic. But then when you decide, the integrity phase, I think, is harder and sometimes more important. And we're going to see that in this story, because the story goes on. It doesn't end here. The guy that Balak sent goes back home. He goes back to seek the king, King Balak, and Balak goes, hey, where's Balaam? And he's going, well, he wouldn't come. Why not? Well, I don't know. He said, mumbled something about can't curse somebody God's blessing. Well, Balak is a political leader, right? And political leaders think that when they have a problem, the way you solve it is you throw more money at it. Right? Am I telling something false there? Okay. So what Balak does is he gets a bigger fee, right? He riches and jewels and coins and everything, and he takes them and he puts them together and he gives them to some of the biggest celebrities in the land. People that you know, he knows that Balaam's going to want to have a conversation with and say, you know, I was just talking to LeBron last week, and we were talking about basketball or whatever. You know, he sends these celebrities over, and they knock on Balaam's door and say, hey, King Balak sent us. He's got this work he needs you to do. He needs you to go curse these Israelites. And Balaam says, well, I don't know. I can only do what God tells me I can do. Come on in. And so he brings him in, and he says, I'll put you up for the night. I'll give you an answer in the morning. And so he hobnobs with him that evening, goes and talks to God, and God says, okay, you can go. And so then he goes back and he tells him they can go. And in this case, what we see is that Balaam has made a bad decision. Now, why do I say that was a bad decision? Well, is God still blessing the Israelites? Has anything changed from the time he said no to the first guy that came? Well, okay. Yes, something has changed. But has anything fundamental to the problem? Has the answer, anything that would change the right answer, changed? It hasn't. What should Balaam have done? What should he have done? He should have sent those guys home. He should have said, boy, I'm sure appreciate the offer, and I'm honored you came to see me, but I can't do this. You guys can go. But he didn't do that. Instead, he invited them in for the evening, and he spent the evening with them, staring at no doubt at the reward that he was going to have while he was talking to them. And then he has to go, and he has this conversation with God. And I'm just imagining how this conversation went. God, can I go? Can I go? Can I go? Can I? I'll do exactly what you need. I'll tell you exactly what you want me to say. And then I can just imagine, and again, I'm sure this isn't accurate, but run with me here. I can just imagine God rolling his eyes and going, okay. But you have to say only what I would say. And so, and how many of you know that sometimes when we really want something bad, we promise something that we didn't really mean or aren't really going to follow through on? I think we're going to see that happen here too. So Balaam makes this bad decision, and it's, well, I don't know. If you think about it, it sounds like the right thing to do. But how do we handle temptation that comes into our lives? Is the right way to handle temptation to give into it? No. Is the right way to handle it to resist it? And the answer is, well, that's not actually the ideal way to handle temptation. But I can tell you one thing for sure. The right way to handle temptation is not to invite temptation to come in for the night, stick around, stare at it, converse with it, and hobnob with it, and then, go have a little prayer time with God afterwards. Right? That is not the right. What is the way to handle temptation? Flee temptation. That is the way to handle temptation. Flee, you fools! Oh, all right. Gandalf was in a different situation there, but that is the way we handle temptation. And this is not what Balaam did. He entertained temptation. And then what happens is the story goes on. He gets up in the morning, he saddles up his donkey, and he leaves. And it says, the wrath of the Lord was kindled against him. Now, the first few times I read this, I thought, this is unfair. God, you just said he could go. Now, why are you mad at him for going? Is God fickle? He's not. You see, God isn't mad at Balaam for going. He's mad at Balaam for why he wants to go and what he intends to do when he gets there. Because what's going on in Balaam's mind? What's going on in Balaam's mind is he's thinking of all the ways that he can use God's word to curse the Israelites. Now, how do I know that? That's not actually in these. If you're reading those verses, it's not in there. How do I know that? I know that because that's exactly what my heart does. Is it figures out how to take what's supposed to happen and do something else. And I think of a time just about a month ago, I had a Balaam moment. And my brother and I have a business together, and we have a contract with a very large endowment and pension fund. And what they do is they invest all this money, and then on their fiscal year ends on June 30th, and they have to report in early July on what the value of their portfolio is. And so for some of the stuff like stocks and bonds, they can just get prices. But some of their money they invest in these money managers, and then they buy private companies and stuff. And they don't know how much those are going to be valued at until the private money managers report, and they don't report until a couple months after the end of the fiscal year. But the endowment, they have to report in early July. So we have a contract with them where we use lots of fancy mathematics, and we predict what the money managers are going to say. And so we did that work. And then, but then what happens is a couple months later, when all the reports come in, then we check the work to see how accurate we were. And this time, I really, really wanted to be accurate because they're our biggest and most important client. In fact, they're really, really critical, central to our business. And our contract was expiring, and we're hoping to get a new one. So I'm all eager to get a new contract. And so I get this file of what the money managers have reported, and I run it through this program that produces all kinds of statistics. Pages and pages of statistics and plots. But the thing that matters the most is this one number that says how close were we? How close did we predict? So I run it. I got this file late in the afternoon. I started running. I get home. It finishes running. And I open up the file to see what I got. And the key number says, it's a great number. We were really close, within 1%. We just nailed it. And I'm going, this is great, because I'm hoping to get another contract, right? Then I'm just checking the rest of it out, feeling pretty good about things, and I come to this place, and I see that this one large investment has a 0 next to it. And I go, did the manager really report 0 for that large investment? And so I have a way to get to this document lake, and I go look it up because they had just reported that week, and it turns out they had reported about what I'd predicted, which sounds like a good thing, but it's not, because it changed that bottom line number from really great to just okay. And immediately I'm facing temptation. And my temptation is to just send the report the way it ran the first time. Well, honestly, I'm thinking about doing that because I'm thinking to myself, well, it wasn't my mistake. It's not my fault the custodial bank put in the wrong number. And so I want to send it that way. And yet, what's the right thing to do? The right thing to do is to give the answer that the data represents and to fix the data when I know what's wrong. So I'm wrestling with this thing, but by this time it's late at night. It's bedtime. I think, well, I'll just deal with it in the morning. So I go to sleep that night. I get up, I go hiking in the morning, I have my prayer time. At the end of my prayer time, I start thinking about this problem again, and I keep going back and forth between I've got to send this and no, I shouldn't. And finally I just say, okay, I am not going to send the client a document with a number I know was wrong in it and not even disclose it. And I had peace for about 10 seconds. And 10 seconds later, my mind thinks, well, what if I just put a little footnote in the report down in the part that nobody reads that says that this number is probably wrong and that it might materially affect the results? And I wrestled with that for a couple of minutes, and I realized, well, wait a minute. If somebody does read it, they'll say, why didn't he fix it? So I said, I can't do that. And immediately the strong impulse comes over, I just need to send this in. Just send it the way it is now. And I guess that maybe is what finally woke me up, was that super strong impulse that I need to do that. And I realized, wait a minute. And so what I decided to do was, okay, God, I'm going to fix that number. I'm going to send in the just okay number. And if we get another contract or we don't, and what kind of contract we get, that's your problem, God. My problem is just to do the best thing. And so in this case, I had the right answer. But I almost did the wrong thing. And why did I almost do the wrong thing? Because I did a Balaam. I said to the temptation, hang around for the night. Right, didn't I? And then in the morning, I hobnobbed with it a bit. I took a look at it. And I came very, very close to doing the wrong thing. So it's very important to flee temptation. And why was God angry at Balaam? Because what Balaam intended to do. But Balaam is all excited now. He's thinking about that fee. He's thinking about what he's going to get. He's out on the road, and he's going down the path. He's riding his donkey, and all of a sudden, the donkey stops and won't go. Stupid donkey. And he whomps it a couple times, and he gets it going again. And he's going along, and it stops again. And he whomps it a couple more times, and it keeps going. But finally, it comes to this place where the path narrows. There's a couple of rocks, and the donkey just won't go. In fact, it just sits down and refuses to move. And Balaam is just, man, he's in a hurry to get. You guys know what this feels like. You're in a hurry, you're late for something, and you're on I-405, right? But he's got a stick. Don't you just wish you could go, whomp, whomp? But that's what he's doing. He's just whomping on the donkey. And this is where we get the Mr. Ed moment. Because the donkey says, why are you beating me? Huh? Why are you beating me these 3 times? Have I ever done this to you before? You mean stop me and talk to me? No, I think it was about the beating. And he goes, And then what God did was he opened Balaam's eyes to see the invisible world. And there standing before him, right there in the path, right in front of the donkey, is an angel of the Lord with a sword. And the angel of the Lord says to him, if that donkey had gone through there, I would have killed you and left the donkey alive. Oh. I tell you what, you don't want me to go? Let me go home. I'll go home. And he says, no, at this point, you're committed. You go, but you say what the Lord gives you to say and nothing else. Yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir. And so he does. He shows up, and Balak greets him, and he goes out there. He warns Balak. He says, I can only say what the God gives me. And he means it this time. And so he ends up blessing the Israelites instead of cursing them. This irritates Balak. And so Balak gives him 2 more chances, and he takes him to 2 more places, and all 3 times he blesses them. And so it's interesting how God can sometimes take a bad decision and turn it into something good. But we shouldn't count on that. Because sometimes when God takes a bad decision and turns it into something good, it's not always the good thing for us. It's good for somebody else. But God is a big God. He takes evil and he can turn it to good. Although he's never the author of it. But in this case, he made it all work. But I want to go back now to the decision-making process, because this decision actually worked out okay. And there's decisions in your life, and if you make a bad decision, God might just show up and turn it into a good decision. Although you got to be careful not to whomp the donkey too much when it refuses to go. But I want to talk about this decision-making because I think it applies to all of us. And the bigger the decision is in life, the more important it is to recognize the 2 phases and to handle those 2 phases properly. And in the intentions phase, figuring out what the right thing to do is, it's important to take enough time. Don't be in a hurry. And the first time when Balaam's had a chance for that work, he didn't instantly jump on it. He somehow recognized this was an important decision, and he took the time to talk to God. And there might be some of you here today, and you're checking out God. You're not even sure if God's real, or you're not sure if he's for you. And you should take enough time and check out and make sure that's true. Don't jump to a hasty decision. Or maybe you're dating a gal and you're trying to decide whether to get married. Take the time to get to know her An instant decision is a bad idea. Or maybe it's a financial decision and you're thinking about buying something. You need to stop and think about it. And so it's important to take that time, but it's also important to make the decision. Because the worst thing you can do is know the right thing to do and then not decide. I mean, what does that do? That basically gives you a chance to decide the opposite. See, I knew the right thing to do was to fix that number and send in that number. I knew it right away. And I came within a hair's breadth of doing something else because I didn't make that decision right there. Right? And so there's a time when you have to make that decision and just make it. And then the decision becomes the turning point, the focal point. Now you shift from the intentions phase to the integrity phase, which is following through on that decision. And that can be hard. Just ask Balaam. Right? Because I make the decision, you make the decision, and then you find out the cost of the decision of doing the right thing is actually harder than you thought. And you have to stick it through. But when you do that, there's a tremendous reward. And if you make the right decision about getting married, there's a tremendous reward, even though it's harder than you thought it was going to be. If you make the right decision about following the Lord, there's an eternal reward. But how many of you know sometimes it's harder than I thought it was going to be? If you make the right decision and it gets hard, that's when you need the integrity phase. And so there's things you can do. You can do things in the intentions phase to sort of help yourself. But there's things you can do to help yourself in the integrity phase. God has given us some ways to practice spiritual integrity. And I was going to talk about a couple of those today. The first one is just a discipline we can put on ourselves is tithing. And think about this. The tithe is kind of a hard thing to do. Give up your money. But the reality is if you've given your life to God, everything you own is God's. It's all His anyway. He's given us stuff to manage, and He's asked us to give the first 10%. And I'm a big believer in that. And here's what I can tell you. You don't give the 10% because the church needs it. You don't give the 10% so everybody will see you give it. You give the 10% because you want to show God that you are indeed managing His things the way He wants it done. And when you do that and you follow through on that, what happens is it's easy to say sometimes when there's enough money in the bank account and all the bills are paid, tithing, not so bad. But then when things get tight, it gets harder to do. It's easy to forget, and it's easy to not go there. And if you follow through and you handle that discipline, here's what I can tell you. I've seen people who've made this transition in their lives. And the reason I say I've seen people is because I'm one of those. That what happens when you tithe in your life is you start to get some financial disciplines in your life that help you in other ways. And you find that you're able to save. And you find that you're able to put things together. And what you find out is that God blesses that. But it's that integrity phase and following through on it. And it's a way to practice. And you get to practice it every paycheck. And there's a second way that you can practice the integrity phase. And this one's really, really optional. It's fasting. And fasting's a spiritual discipline. It's not required of anyone. In fact, Jesus' disciples were challenged by the Pharisees. Why aren't you guys fasting? And Jesus interceded for them, said, well, they will someday, but right now they're with me. So fasting's optional. I'm not telling anybody here that they have to fast. In fact, some of you might have medical conditions and you shouldn't. But if you do fast, it's a way to build spiritual discipline. Because here's how it works. For me, there's been large portions of my life where I haven't done any fasting. But right now, I'm in a phase of my life where I decided I would fast once a week. I want to convince myself, and hopefully God at the same time, that He's more important to me than food. And so one day a week, I try to fast. And so I decided Friday that I was going to fast Saturday. Well, Friday, I was well fed, and I'd eaten enough. It was pretty easy to say, I'm going to fast tomorrow, right? And then Saturday morning, I get up, and there's those grapes in the refrigerator, and it'd be kind of nice to have them, but yeah, I'm fasting today. I'm fine. But I go out and I do my hike. I come back from my hike. It's lunchtime. And the immediate thing I start thinking is, tomorrow would be a great day to fast. In fact, there's all these reasons why tomorrow is a better day to fast than today is. And as I'm going through those reasons, I realize, well, wait a minute. Yeah, tomorrow might be a better day to fast, but the thing is, I told God I was going to fast today. He didn't make me tell Him that, but I told Him that. I'm going to keep that promise. So I make it through lunchtime, And dinner time rolls around, and by this time I am just ravenous because I've passed up all the snacks in the afternoon because I chose a day when I was home, right? And so there's all the refrigerator's been there the whole day. Other people have been cooking and eating meals. And so, but dinner time comes around and I'm just ravenous and I'm thinking, okay, well, I told God I would fast today, but a day's only 24 hours. And see, when was the last time I ate? I could go like 1 minute past that. But what I decided to do instead, of course, is actually wait till, I told him I would fast today. I didn't say 24 hours. If I'd said 24 hours, then maybe I would have. And so I made it through there. And what's happening there? Well, I feel good about it this morning. Why? Because God has been strengthening my spiritual muscles. So anyway, if you feel like fasting, don't do it because you have to or because you feel obligated. And whatever you do, don't do it because you like Sid. Because about dinner time tomorrow, you're going to hate Sid. Right? But it is a way that you can work on that integrity phase of your life. Whenever you make a promise, if you're a husband and you make a promise to your wife, you get to work on the integrity phase. Yes, I will fix the door, or whatever it is that you promise to do. When you go do that, you get to work on the integrity phase. And when we work on that integrity phase, we set ourselves up for life's big decisions and the things that really matter. And so I guess I want to apply that today. If you're here today and you know you're going through a decision and you're having trouble making up your mind, I haven't helped you with the techniques of deciding what the best thing to do is. But I can tell you this, that God will help you with that. But when you decide, when you know what the right thing to do is, it's time to decide. Don't put off the decision when you know what's right because it's hard or because it's scary. And when you decide, you make that transition into the integrity phase, now you have to carry it through. And know that that's going to be the hard part. You might have a little peace at the decision time, but you won't have peace all the way through the process. And just know that God is with you. And the other thing you can know, and this is just so good to know, is that if you make a mistake and you make a bad decision, God is there. And the donkey won't go forward. Let's pray. Father and Lord, I just thank you. I thank you so much that you didn't make us robots, that we have choices. In everything we do and say and are, we have choices. And I thank you, Lord, that you didn't give us rule-based religion, because I know, Lord, that my heart would twist every single one of those rules and find a way to be wicked. I thank you instead, Lord, that what you've done is you've planted a new heart and a soft heart in each and every one of us that believes in you. And Lord, for those today that are maybe considering whether or not to put their trust in you, I ask you to plant a heart and a seed of love for you and softness there. Help us to break that cycle of rule keeping and make us, Lord, with right hearts. And help us, God, then to have the strength to decide, and even more importantly, the strength to carry through. And Lord, forgive us when we fail. And Lord, I just praise you. When I fail, Lord, make it so the donkey won't go forward. And I ask these things in Jesus' mighty name, knowing that it's all for you and for your glory. Amen. Amen. And I'm not sure you're supposed to give the benediction, but I would like to, Steve. Is that all right? May the Lord bless you and keep you and make his face shine upon you. May he show you his countenance and give you peace. Bless you all today. Thank you for coming.